Greetings, everybody. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis in the Rawls College of Business at Texas Tech University. It is April 3rd, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to another version of CARMA Quick Chat. If you're not familiar with CARMA, we are a university-based research methods education center that focuses on training and information sharing of particular interest and relevance to doctoral students and faculty in management and organization studies. And we have a variety of types of events that we do. We're nearly 30 years of existence. We offer online panels and online workshops, as well as a very extensive set of online short courses in January and June. For the June ones, let me point out that we have both micro and macro, quantitative and qualitative, and introductory and advanced level topics. So we feel like we have a little something for everybody. And basically, our membership model is generally at the institution level. This year, we have about 150 universities worldwide that are members, but also we have some special groups like the Academy of Management and the Southern Management Association that get special access to sets of those events. Our main program that we've been doing since 2004 involves hosting webcast lectures by distinguished methodologists. We offer them on 6 dates during the year. And what we started doing is offering two each day, one that starts a little earlier for us, that makes it middle of the afternoon on a Friday for our European friends and community that we're trying to build and support. And then we have another one a little bit later in the day. So for our key contributors, we'd like to have a chat with them before they do their presentation. And so today it's my pleasure to be chatting with Professor Javier Martin, who is a professor of strategy and international business at the Tilburg School of Economics and Management. And we're talking to Javier because a week from tomorrow, at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, which makes it the middle afternoon in the European community, he will be giving a webcast lecture for us. And I've had the pleasure of working with Javier in several contexts over recent years. He's contributed in other ways to CARMA. And so, Javier, we're really very thankful that you're going to take the time to give a lecture for us and that you've taken the time to have this quick chat with us. Okay, you ready?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Larry. It's great to have the chance to have this chat with you and with any future participants. You've been an awesome supporter of the division and of the journal. I was thrilled to see that you even published in our journal very recently,
Yes.
and that there is a lot to be learned from what's going on at Karma for people who may be interested in the journal and vice versa. So I really
Well,
look forward
thank
to this
you.
conversation.
Yep, thank
Yeah.
you. I was very proud to have an article in a replication, a constructive replication study in
Yeah.
the January issue. So, Javier, as I've
Yeah.
over the years had the pleasure of interacting and learning about the people who contribute to Karma, I'm always surprised at the many winding routes that they have taken in their
Yeah.
developmental years to end up arriving as a contributor to Karma. So, in your case, what led you to become a professor?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and one that on some level we need to revisit throughout our career. In my case, I will say I was not a born methodologist, but I always had a keen interest in ideas since essentially my early education. And frankly, if you're interested in ideas, eventually you become interested in science.
Yeah.
And therefore, you become interested in the process of science and what advances science and what corrects science. And you understand at some point that the two processes of advancement and correction come hand in hand. And so I slowly sort of started to get curious about more academic streams of education and the business education I had at the onset. And then along the way, I think two things made a big difference. One is I had the great fortune of interacting at various critical points in my personal journey with scholars who were just committed uh, people with durable, curious, structured, but also very creative careers in academia. Um, People whose names, unfortunately, are now in the past. It's the late Roland Callery in Lyon, Al Lidvack in Toronto, and Will Mitchell, but also a great number of other superb scholars at the University of Michigan. And then part of that also was being fortunate to be in a setting during my PhD and then in my subsequent career, where there were great method scholars around, and there was an emulation around the notion that you can't stay still, you can't assume that the world of ideas is steady. That's obvious. But even beyond that, you can't assume that the world of methods is stable and set. And so it's been a great journey along the way. But for me, it's been a natural process of going from ideas to science to scholarship to what I am today, and hopefully contributing to others in a way.
Yeah. So your interest in methods kind of began as a grad student and continued to emerge due to those experiences.
Yes, it did. So, as I mentioned, I didn't have a particularly technical background at the onset. Uh, but one of the great pieces of advice, and there were others that I'd be glad to share in other contexts, but one of the great pieces of advice I got as a PhD student and relatively early on was to use the PhD as an opportunity to build a large, complex toolbox of methods. And so I was very curious. I had the opportunity and the great fortune of being at a university where doors were open to all sorts of other schools, summer programs and the like. And so I took in as many methods as I could, um, you know, stuff in the field of management, but also courses from the likes of Rick Bagozzi and Bob Axelrod, great methodologists in other fields. And then what I noticed along the way pretty quickly is I had expected that, some of those methods would just stay in my satchel, so to speak. But I pretty quickly realized that some of them were becoming obsolete. And I'm one of that generation of scholars of whom many of my fellow PhDs were swept away by the so-called identification revolution, and some didn't recover. And I was fortunate enough to be in a setting where I could sort of adjust and retrain and switch myself. And I discovered that really the way in this career is not just to learn and then apply, it's to consistently, continuously even retrain yourself and learn about new methods. And so that idea that you build that toolbox has become essentially basically a continuous journey for me. And I think that's what allowed me to hopefully remain fresh in my own research, but also contribute to others. And
Yeah.
so, partly because of that trajectory, because I benefited so much from what others were contributing to me, how much I learned from them, I think it became a bit natural to also at some point want to give back to the
Yeah.
methods community.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of what led to your involvement with the Research Methods Division. And over the years, you've done some different things with them. Could you share
Mhm.
some of the events that you're and programs that you're currently working on with the Research Methods Division?
Yeah, with pleasure. So as I said, I went from a trajectory where I was learning from others to a trajectory where, at some point, I took on responsibilities and even leadership of other divisions and other associations. And at that stage, the focus was more on basically who are the leading scholars, what are the leading edge ideas. But really, you become aware if you're involved with a division that it's about sharing with the greatest number of people possible. And the Research Methods Division is really unique in that respect. It has a fabulous online and it's been one of the pioneers in going online for its doctoral consortium. We're very fortunate to be sponsored by Karma,
Mhm.
which provides us both a technological platform that's sort of pretty unequaled and support for social and other events and access to the greatest panelists and many of the minds who contribute other webinars to Karma. And so while I had done my share of leading other divisions, but at the research methods division, my role is much more focused, and I'm very pleased. It's been a great experience. I'm chairing and co-chairing the consortium, which is again co-sponsored by the division and by Karma.
Mhm.
And what we do in the consortium is basically open the gates as widely as possible in a well-focused sort of format. 4 sessions in June. We'll be announcing this year's consortium and panel shortly. But over that period, people get to go through about 30 some hours, uh, get the chance to meet with 25, 26, 27, or 28 prominent scholars and learn about a subset of the methods that you're interested in. Spend an hour in each session or two, talking one-on-one or in small groups with some people who are the forefront of methods and basically build their own toolbox. And we do that essentially for free. The only cost really is becoming a member of the division and the Academy of Management, which is largely taken for granted for many of Karma participants. And we've had a great experience with delivering this format, which is, I like to believe, not only accommodates more participants, but generates more individual ideas and feedback than most standard consortia can do.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's been Karma's been very happy to be a supporter, and there's so much that's good about it. Let me point out that although we are a supporter, you do not have to be at a Karma member school to participate. It is opened up more broadly than that.
Yeah,
And I think what strikes me about it is that the kind of the mix of panelists that contribute, because you have had over the years some of the more senior, very distinguished people whose names everybody would recognize, but also there's been the involvement of more junior faculty who have a lot to contribute to the development of doctoral students. So we're
yeah,
very excited to be involved with that. Well,
yeah.
Javier, sometime during that transition or during the evolution of your career, you became interested in replication research. So, when and how did that happen?
So again, it's great to have the chance to reflect on that and share. Um, Fundamentally, if you have an interest in science and in ideas, which I had from the onset, then you must have an interest in how knowledge accumulates, but also how knowledge gets trimmed and how ideas get recycled and as well as advanced. And so ultimately that necessarily means replications. But to me, even as a PhD student, replication was not a particularly central idea, although I will say in retrospect, I noticed that two of my great graduate school friends um, uh, have were some of the early advocates of replications in our field, Kulwant Singh and Miles Shaver. So they were ahead of my thinking in that respect and of partly largely of the field. Um, but at the same time, as times allowed, besides the identification sort of revolution, what I think has been one of the great developments in our field has been how the field as a whole became more aware of its limitations. Sometimes we refer to it as a reproducibility or replicability crisis, although I try to go well beyond that in what I share, including in the upcoming webinar, that entered in our field via other fields like psychology, eventually economics, political science, and the like, all these fields that I was sort of curiously sampling my knowledge and my methods from. And so I became aware that this was an issue. But at the same time, we didn't really have the institutional tools to make much of a dent in that. We were frankly the great uh, papers that we think of as flagging uh, issues, but also best practice in replications, were not coming out in management journals. And so it was a bit of a personal journey of learning about this, going to other fields again, like I did as a PhD student,
Mhm.
picking up the methods, which are pretty specific methods for replication research. And at this stage, essentially, I became aware that one of the things that people not only, I would say, can do, but in a sense, should really challenge themselves to do earlier on in their PhD, that I wish I had been more attuned to then, but that I'm sure can be done more effectively now, is start and do a replication early on in your PhD, which is, the way my own PhD students nowadays are thriving by doing it. And some of the authors that we support at GeoMSR, some of the people who are our panelists for the RMD consortium, all share that a new and growing awareness that replications is something that we need to do, but at the same time, we need to build a common platform, a common understanding, even a common terminology, which is not that trivial, before we can make progress. So for me, it became, you know, the natural consequence of being curious about and caring about my field of science and the field of management, and hopefully contributing in my own way to this.
And that's that interest and that development of your presence in that space is what led you to become involved with the Journal of Management Scientific Reports, JOMSR. Can you tell us about what your involvement is with JOMSR?
Yes, so although I don't get credit to the people, the fabulous people at SMA, including Janaki Guti and the then leadership and a number of panels and working groups around that were involved. I believe you were also involved in this. So GMSR was founded in 2022. I came along as I guess suppose the second or third recruit of the leadership team of the journal, invited by our current and in a little while outgoing editor Maria Kramer. And basically, what GeoMSR is, um, and was designed and frankly thought of as, is a blank slate, uh, but supported with the great people of SMA and journal management, published by Sage, which is, a superb publishing house to work with, and where we have a focus and a mandate to advance replication research and original sophisticated testing of theory that's typically been too hard or impossible, or that nobody else has thought about testing before. Not developing new theory, but testing theory, and replication is a big part of testing theory anyway, but it's also a big part of what we publish. We see it in our special issues as well.
Yeah.
So I've been lucky to work with people like Maria Kramer, Scott Zybert, and Bill Schultz on the first team, and great reviewers and ERB. Um, Basically, fundamentally, I suspect at this point, publish more replication than just about any journal in the field of management, even
Mhm.
though we're just a few years old. And hopefully we'll be building the platform and the space for people to do their replications without sort of fearing that they'll be benchmarked against standards of heterogeneous types of manuscripts, where things like theoretical contribution or methods for the sake of methods come to the front, but rather pursue constructive replication of the type that you published recently in our journal, in fact. And so that's, to me, the centerpiece of JOMSR. That's what I'm trying to build with the next team. I'll be taking over as editor-in-chief as coming to 2027. I'm currently building the next team. We want to scale up the journal, and we want to broaden its recognition and its availability, accessibility, and how interested it is to people in the field of management. And it's been a great experience so far.
Yeah. Well, I'm congratulate JOMSR most generally on its success, and you particular for your role in that. Karma has been supportive in the past, and I will look forward to that continuing under your leadership. So, Javier, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're chatting today largely, although it's just great to get to know you better, but largely we're chatting as a preview for your webcast lecture next Friday, April the 10th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, U.S. Eastern Time. Can you give us a preview of what you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, thank you, Larry, for doing this. So, what we'll be talking about during this session? Well, we can start. We cannot deny that the way replication and specifically reproducibility, our ability to come up with the same result with roughly the same research design, um, has come into the field sort of banged on the door through what's referred to as the reproducibility or replicability crisis. But it turns out that there are many different roles for very different types of replication, and there's different benefits and also, frankly, challenges to doing replications for different purposes at different stages in your career. And so what we'll do in the webinar is I'll start by sort of the lay of the land. I'll describe a bit of the history and motivation, but frankly, that's not that central. I think at this point, many people are aware that they will be under the purview of replication, that if they don't replicate, their well will be replicated. And sometimes it'd be better to be at the forefront in that respect. So we'll talk about different types of reproducibility. We'll talk about terminology so that we have a bit of a common language, which is still a bit evolving in our field and even in social science in general. And that's the background for understanding different motivations, why you do replications. And I'll focus in particular on the fact that while we've heard a lot about uh, large-scale replication studies that find that there's a lot that may have been wrong with previous research. Fundamentally, we don't know whether the original was wrong or the replication was wrong. So we need to be a bit more humble than that, more focused. And so overwhelmingly, the type of replication research that should be of interest to Karma members are situations where you take existing research and you try to build on it. And yes, you may identify the flaws along the way, but fundamentally, you're accumulating knowledge, you're adding, you're improving on previous science. And the label that you've used duly before, Larry, is that of constructive replication. So we'll talk about what that means and why that's basically a more productive way to think about doing replication, especially when you're at the PhD stage or early career stage, but also how there's comes a later stage in life. My last published replication was just a few months ago where you do it and where you continue to do it, Larry. So there's different horses for different courses in this area. But once we've done that, we'll focus on constructive replications, and then I'll work through examples and advice. Which study do you focus on? How do you choose which study to replicate? Um, how do you structure your analysis? What is the to do and not to do list of steps to undertake, and how do you iterate through gaps in understanding what was going on in the original study, filling out the gaps yourself, learning the methods, learning new methods, supplementing the previous study, and so forth. So that's all the analysis. And then that means that we need to also be very careful, thirdly, about what we emphasize and what doesn't work, frankly, in writing up a replication study. At the end of the day, it's as much a hurdle as anything else. Is uh, People have become so well attuned through their doctoral education to reading and writing a standard so-called original novel paper, your AMJ template or maybe your AOM template, that they get a bit sometimes surprised by the not so trivial differences when it comes to writing up a replication. The way you work with theory differently, the way you lay out your methods and your results, and ultimately, very interestingly, the way you reach conclusions a bit differently, and therefore you write them up. And so given this, what the last point I'll touch on is basically how the review process can be a bit different. The revision process can be a bit different, and I'll give, to a certain extent, an author, but especially an editor's perspective on that, which I think I'm able to contribute by virtue of my experience at GeoMSR. And then it's not trivial, but at the very end, time allowing, we'll touch on some new methodological advances and developments and trends, and essentially some breakthroughs that are taking place that allow us to essentially parse out the relative contribution of a replication study versus the original study to knowledge. The two may agree, they may disagree, but fundamentally, we can sort of sum this all up in a meaningful way, sometimes via meta-analysis, but other methods are allowing us to basically take the results of an original study, take the results of a replication, and make it add up to more than 1+1.
Well, that all sounds very exciting. Again, that'll be a week from tomorrow, or April the 10th, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And it is at 9 a.m. Eastern time in the US. You can check your time in the European area to figure out exactly which time in the afternoon it is. Javier Martin, leader within the research methods community, and particularly in the area of replication research. Thanks so much for allowing us to chat with you, and we'll look forward to your lecture next week.
And thank you, Larry, for the platform and for everything you've been doing for so long for Karma, for the Research Methods Division, and for the field as a whole. I look forward to the session and to also to people's questions and to
Yep.
the Q&A part as well as just the webinar part.
Yep. And again, you can find more information about the webcast lecture and everything about Karma at our website, karmattu.com. So thanks, and everybody enjoy your day.